Hey guys, welcome to episode 151 of Stand Up. My first guest today is Turow. She is a writer and speaker. Her new book is Hungry, Avocado Toast Instagram Influencers and Our Search for Connection and Meaning. And that interview begins at 18 minutes and 15 seconds in because I played for you the entire almost 10 minutes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez floor speech about the name calling that you're probably familiar with. Also, join me, of course, it's Friday. Christian Finnegan. That conversation begins at 1 hour and 7 minutes. I'm Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hello, stand-up community. Thank you very much for joining me today. I have sore throat right now, and I'm pretty sure it's just because I ingested maybe a little bit of polyurethane while I was cutting a window for the new shed. Because Nick came over, we worked on the shed tonight. Nick Di Fabrizio. Great Nick. I'm going to name the shed studio the D-Fab. Anyway, we were working on it, and maybe I inhaled something. My throat hurts. Do I have COVID? 2,600 new COVID cases every hour, according to Reuters. Florida has reported the most deaths in a day. And it's ugly out there, everybody. Right now in the Northeast, the states of New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York, where I live, of course, have this pact to keep people out, basically, and do everything they can to protect us. Most of us are wearing masks. I saw something today that said if 95% of Americans, here it is from the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. Sounds like a fun place to be. They estimate that if 95% of people wear cloth masks when they're in public, we could avoid future economy-killing lockdowns. So, what do you think of that? Can we do it? I don't know. I don't think we can. Breaking news last night that the president announced he's going to cancel Jacksonville portion of the Republican National Convention, which he'd already moved to Florida from North Carolina. So apparently that's not going to be able to happen. And the U.S. surpassed 4 million coronavirus cases a little over 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks after reaching 3 million. Also, another 1.4 million U.S. workers filed for unemployment insurance last week. And the White House and Senate Republicans apparently are not agreeing on coronavirus legislation that the president tested. It also has insisted that the cognitive test he recently took was really difficult and not easy because he had to correctly recall the phrase person, woman, man, camera, TV. Did you see this? Did you hear about this? Did anybody hear about this? Insane. What a joke. I woke up to that this morning. You probably did as well. What else is happening? How are you doing? Did you hear about the exchange between Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a congressman named Ted Yoho? That's his last name is Yoho. Imagine growing up as a child and your last name is Yoho. I almost have compassion for him simply because he had to grow up with that name, but somehow he overcame it to become the congressman from Florida. According to a reporter from The Hill, who overheard a confrontation between Congressman Yoho and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the steps of the Capitol, Yoho, as he walked away after the confrontation, called AOC a fucking bitch. Well, yesterday, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took to the House floor to affirm the version of the events that was reported, to call out Yoho for his behavior and his attempt to use his wife and his daughters as a shield for what he had done. And I pulled the entire audio. It's just over 9 minutes, I think. If you already heard it and you don't want to listen to it, then you could just skip ahead like 9 minutes and get right to my interview with my first guest, Turow. Sorry, I just heard some loud engine outside. But I really think you should listen to this whole thing if you haven't already. I actually listened to it twice because I listened to it earlier when my friend Dan McDonald sent it over to me. And then I listened to it again when I was editing the podcast together tonight when I pulled the audio. It's so good. Really is good. It's actually 9 minutes and 54 seconds, and it's well worth it, especially for men. I think men will appreciate this. I mean, women will appreciate it, but men really need to hear it. And I just think it's great. I think she's great. I talk about her with Christian Finnegan later. But here it is right now, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez addressing Ted Yoho and his behavior. I mean, Congressman Ted Yoho. Yoho.
And he was accompanied by Representative Roger Williams and accosted me on the steps right here in front of our nation's Capitol. I was minding my own business, walking up the steps, and Representative Yoho put his finger in my face. About 2 days ago, I was walking up the steps of the Capitol when Representative Yoho suddenly turned a corner, and he was accompanied by Representative Roger Williams, and accosted me on the steps right here in front of our nation's Capitol. I was minding my own business, walking up the steps, and Representative Yoho put his finger in my face. He called me disgusting. He called me crazy. He called me out of my mind. And he called me dangerous. And then he took a few more steps, and after I had recognized his comments as rude, he walked away and said, "I'm rude. You're calling me rude." I took a few steps ahead, and I walked inside and cast my vote, because my constituents send me here each and every day to fight for them and to make sure that they are able to keep a roof over their head, that they're able to feed their families, and that they're able to carry their lives with dignity. I walked back out, and there were reporters in the front of the Capitol, and in front of reporters, Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, "a fucking bitch." These are the words that Representative Yoho levied against a congresswoman, the congresswoman that not only represents New York's 14th congressional district, but every congresswoman and every woman in this country, because all of us have had to deal with this in some form, some way, some shape, at some point in our lives. And I want to be clear that Representative Yoho's comments were not deeply hurtful or piercing to me, because I have worked a working class job. I have waited tables in restaurants. I have ridden the subway. I have walked the streets in New York City. And this kind of language is not new. I have encountered words uttered by Mr. Yoho and men uttering the same words as Mr. Yoho while I was being harassed in restaurants. I have tossed men out of bars that have used language like Mr. Yoho's. And I have encountered this type of harassment riding the subway in New York City. This is not new. And that is the problem. Mr. Yoho was not alone. He was walking shoulder to shoulder with Representative Roger Williams. And that's when we start to see that this issue is not about one incident. It is cultural. It is a culture of lack of impunity, of accepting of violence and violent language against women, and an entire structure of power that supports that. Because not only have I been spoken to disrespectfully, particularly by members of the Republican Party and elected officials in the Republican Party, not just here, but the President of the United States last year told me to go home to another country, with the implication that I don't even belong in America. The governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, before I even was sworn in, called me a whatever that is. Dehumanizing language is not new. And what we are seeing is that incidents like these are happening in a pattern. This is a pattern of an attitude towards women and dehumanization of others. So while I was not deeply hurt or offended by little comments that are made. When I was reflecting on this, I honestly thought that I was just going to pack it up and go home. It's just another day, right? But then yesterday, Representative Yoho decided to come to the floor of the House of Representatives and make excuses for his behavior. And that I could not let go. I could not allow my nieces, I could not allow the little girls that I go home to, I could not allow victims of verbal abuse and worse to see that excuse, and to see our Congress accept it as legitimate and accept it as an apology, and to accept silence as a form of acceptance. I could not allow that to stand, which is why I am rising today to raise this point of personal privilege. And I do not need Representative Yoho to apologize to me. Clearly, he does not want to. Clearly, when given the opportunity, he will not. And I will not stay up late at night waiting for an apology from a man who has no remorse over calling women and using abusive language towards women. But what I do have issue with is using women, our wives and daughters, as shields and excuses for poor behavior. Mr. Yoho mentioned that he has a wife and 2 daughters. I am 2 years younger than Mr. Yoho's youngest daughter. I am someone's daughter too. My father, thankfully, is not alive to see how Mr. Yoho treated his daughter. My mother got to see Mr. Yoho's disrespect on the floor of this house towards me on television. And I am here because I have to show my parents that I am their daughter and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men. Now, what I am here to say is that this harm that Mr. Yoho tried to levy against me was not just an incident directed at me. But when you do that to any woman, what Mr. Yoho did was give permission to other men to do that to his daughters. In using that language in front of the press, he gave permission to use that language against his wife, his daughters, women in his community. And I am here to stand up to say that is not acceptable. I do not care what your views are. It does not matter how much I disagree or how much it incenses me or how much I feel that people are dehumanizing others. I will not do that myself. I will not allow people to change and create hatred in our hearts. And so what I believe is that having a daughter does not make a man decent. Having a wife does not make a decent man. Treating people with dignity and respect makes a decent man. And when a decent man messes up, as we all are bound to do, he tries his best and does apologize. Not to save face, not to win a vote. He apologizes genuinely to repair and acknowledge the harm done so that we can all move on. Lastly, what I want to express to Mr. Yoho is gratitude. I want to thank him for showing the world that you can be a powerful man and accost women. You can have daughters and accost women without remorse. You can be married and accost women. You can take photos and project an image to the world of being a family man and accost women without remorse and with a sense of impunity. It happens every day in this country. It happened here on the steps of our nation's capital. It happens when individuals who hold the highest office in this land admit to hurting women and using this language against all of us. But once again, I thank my colleagues for joining us today. I will reserve the hour of my time, and I will yield to my colleague, Representative Jayapal of Washington. Thank you.
How about that? What did you think of that floor speech by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? One of my favorite feminists on Twitter is a woman that goes by @MRaz, feminist next door. She tweets, "Hey guys, I'm glad you're taking a stand against Congressman Ted Yoho, but it doesn't mean shit if you're still Roger Williams, because the standard you walk past is the standard you accept." You've heard me quote that Australian general when talking about sexual harassment in his ranks from a few years ago, and that's Roger Williams in this case. You can't sit there and listen to a congressman call another congressman woman a fucking bitch and do nothing. You're just as guilty. So that's how I feel, at least. Also, I stopped calling women or referring to women as bitches years ago when I did workshops with a great organization, an anti-domestic abuse organization called Breakthrough, and a woman named Malika Dutt, who I hear from sometimes on social media. She's no longer running that organization, but I should probably get her on. She taught me that language matters a lot. And I told my daughters I don't like it when they say it, but they're girls and they can say it. But I don't use that word to describe women, or really at all. I don't like it. Words matter, language matters, and I think we can all be better. It's not that hard. Okay, well, speaking of amazing women, my first guest today is a new guest. I've been getting a lot of new guests on the podcast that I didn't talk to before when I was at SiriusXM, and I'm excited about that because I'm hitting off with a lot of new people, and I'm really excited to introduce you, if you don't already know her, to a woman who's a real thought leader and focuses on the intersection of the digital age, food trends, and well-being. Her new book is so good, so interesting, and as a side note, she's actually the best-selling author, the thriller writer Scott Turow. It's his daughter. And her name is Eve Turow Paul. She's married to an elementary school teacher in Chicago, and she's just really interesting, very smart. And her new book is called Hungry: Avocado Toast, Instagram Influencers, and Our Search for Connection and Meaning. She researches human behavior and the impact of new technologies and cultural events, and examines how these shift to impact people's wants and needs, all through the lens of lifestyle trends and as well as food and the food system. And she's also got a nonprofit, the Food for Climate League, and she is on Twitter and Instagram at Eve Turow Paul. I'm very excited to introduce her to you if you don't know her already. We really hit it off. We had an awesome conversation, and here it is right now. Eve Turow Paul, I think she's outside, which I always love to talk with people outside. Have you ever listened to a conversation, a podcast, where the guest or the host is outside and you hear birds and be annoyed? I love it. I think it's
I
nice.
hope you do. If they ever get overly aggressive with their tweeting, just let me know and I'll head back indoors.
If it sounds like you're actually in an aviary, I'll let you know. Or if
okay.
I don't know about how much you know birds. I don't know much, but I do know I don't love the sound of a blue jay. They seem evil.
Really? Oh, I'm not that sophisticated when it comes to my bird knowledge.
Make a very angry noise.
Yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, beginning of lockdown, we actually had a robin lay a nest on our deck, and we watched the whole process. So my husband does now have an interest in becoming a birder, but we haven't quite gotten there yet.
That's really exciting. No, that's great. And you guys actually did that together? Like you would talk about the bird family almost as if they were your own, I bet.
Oh, yes. It was our family's entertainment to sit on the stairs and watch the birds. hatch and grow and leave the nest. It was amazing.
Well, let's pick up there on your new book, because I've been talking for years with people like Rich Louv and so many other folks about the importance of a connection to nature, which you say is so vitally important. And I know there's a lot of data and research on it. I'm not sure that it's necessary because I think people feel it. But let's talk about what you found in your research for your new book.
Yeah. So my book is really going through what is it that we need to feel well, and how are our needs, our well-being needs, reflected in the ways that we spend our discretionary time and income. So most of the book is looking at food trends, lifestyle trends, and asking, well, why? Why are we looking at pictures of food online? Why are we so invested in CrossFit? Why are we so interested in baking sourdough bread? And the end of the book really gets into our basic human needs for purpose. And when I started to delve into the research around what we need to feel like our lives have meaning, the role of nature continued to come up time and time again. So nature doesn't just make us feel good, which I agree with you. I think we just all know intuitively, especially right now during lockdown. I think we're all just itching to get outside and spend more time in nature. It also will reward us physiologically. It is better for our physical health, and it makes us feel meaningful. So when you watch something like a robin lay its eggs and watch the chicks hatch and watch them grow and watch them leave the nest, in this counterintuitive way, it can make you feel like a small part of a bigger ecosystem, which each of us are. And they've shown that in studies that this actually induces a sense of awe and gratitude in life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just got one quick anecdote, which I've told, a few times before, but I title it. It's called The Bee of Sicily. My wife's family lives in Sicily. I watched this bee try to get into a closed flower for what seemed to be minutes. And the fact that I just stood there and stayed in that moment is a credit to me. But more importantly, I didn't have a lot of faith.
It was a meditation.
Well, yeah. I mean, granted, I didn't have Wi-Fi, but I didn't have a lot of faith in that bee. Even I was ridiculing that bee, going, "You silly bee! You're never going to get. What do you keep trying to get in that? You're never going to get. Son of a bitch! He got in that flower. He got in after, or she. It's probably a he, right? Drone? I don't know. But regardless of the gender of the bee, it was a metaphor for just being resilient and not giving up on something. And I'll never, ever forget that. So that's my little anecdote, articulating what you just said, demonstrating what you just said, the research says about feeling good about something.
Right. And I think that a lot of what my research is based in is exploring the why behind the things that I enjoy to do, enjoy doing. But, another big part of this is, it's not just figuring out the why behind it, but like what is on the most fundamental level, like how is this influencing my health? So it's not just it's emotional well-being, it's also physical well-being. And again, parts of being in nature, okay, it makes sense that it's going to be good for your physical well-being, right? Like you're exercising more, you're around hopefully, cleaner air if you have lots of trees around. But there are these other benefits to being in nature physiologically that I had no idea about before I started doing research on the book, that have to do with things like the essential oils that are coming off of tree bark after it rains. And there's different bacteria in healthy soil that can act as an antidepressant. And it's like, oh, maybe that's why I feel so great after gardening. So you and I have talked about the fact that, in our jobs, we just get to talk to interesting people and then tell others about it. And that's all I got to do with this book. And I learned so much along the way, and I had a lot of fun researching it. Yeah,
so well researched. And that means a lot to me when I'm talking to folks that they've really done their homework. And you certainly have here, and people will give you a lot of credits on that. I, too, am a huge gardener. I talk about it probably too much here on the show, but it has changed my life in a number of different ways. And you may just mention scientifically what some of them might have been, but it's obviously something. And it's also something that a lot of people are now discovering, being outside and being in the garden. Let me ask you this, though. Yeah. When did you start writing your new book? And at what point did the pandemic break out? And when or did that, if anything, change or even accentuate what you were looking into? Because it's kind of timely in a way. A book like yours is really, I think, helpful, and everybody should get it. It's called Hungry, everybody. And but what was the timing of it all?
All good questions. I started writing the book about 4 years ago. I shouldn't say started writing. I started researching it 4 years ago. And then I turned it in, I think the final draft was very, very early 2019.
Okay.
So it was in before all the craziness started to happen. But it was really interesting, especially in the first few weeks of the pandemic, to watch what was happening in the marketplace, especially in terms of food behaviors. So what people were posting online in terms of what they were eating or baking or gardening, growing. And what I've been finding in the last, oh my gosh, has it been like 6 months now? I think it has been. Has it been? I think it has.
Depends where you are, but yeah, March, April, May, June. Yeah, yep.
Yeah. What I've found essentially is that the themes that I was exploring in the book have just become exacerbated.
Yes. Yeah, really, because, I mean, if you look at the chapters of your book, transparency and anxiety,
right.
What is it? Shared experiences and relatedness. I think that's really interesting and important. And of course, nature and well-being, not to mention everything else. So much of what you're writing about here with food and psychology is like it just so happened that the pandemic, in my mind, is extremely relevant to what you're writing about, which is why people really should buy your book. I know you wouldn't want it to be that way, but it's helpful. Did you plan the pandemic? Are you working with the QAnon people?
Know?
I don't know who they are.
I wish it wasn't so relevant right now, because I mean, really the takeaways from this, deep dive again into the why behind our sometimes kooky behaviors, like investing in avocado toast or spending $35 to go like cycle in a room with other people.
Right.
The high level takeaways here were we're really anxious, we're really lonely, and we're searching for meaning. Those were the three core emotions that I identified that were driving, so many of the food and lifestyle trends that we've been seeing, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. Now it's just like those emotional experiences have gone into hyperdrive, and we don't really know entirely how that's going to be reflected in the marketplace moving forward, because, obviously how we spend money, how we spend our time is still limited in many ways. But it's really not so surprising that people are getting into gardening, even if that's just a windowsill garden.
Or even cooking. I mean, people don't cook.
Or baking sourdough bread, or limiting their food waste, or buying supplements. People want to feel in control of their own health and well-being. We want to feel connected in whatever capacity that is. And maybe that's just Netflixing and binging in tandem with a loved one in another location. And we want to demarcate our days in some way where we feel like we are progressing.
Very well said.
And learning how to bake sourdough bread is just one example of like a very tangible, delicious way of growing as a person, building a new skill set.
Well, part one of your book is titled Control. And I think that, again, the pandemic lays bare or creates a desire, a greater desire for control than even before when you were researching and writing the book, because there's so much uncertainty about everything, including food and where our nutrition is going to come from. We try to create control wherever we can. So it's growing a plant, a basil. It's baking bread. It's learning how to cook and make stuff for yourself, because it's the only thing really, and even then, that you can control. But what do you attribute that to? What did you learn is at the root of our desire for so much control?
Well, I mean,
and is it healthy?
Like well, I mean, yes and no, right? A lot of these things go back to evolution. And I spent a lot of time talking to evolutionary biologists and evolutionary psychologists, because and that wasn't my intention, to be honest, like in starting this project. But the themes that I was looking at kept going back to, what did we evolve for? What environment are Homo sapiens supposed to be in? And it's not the one that we've created by and large. So this desire for control is a survival instinct, right? People who knew what was up, like what was going on around them, they had a higher likelihood of surviving. They didn't have a 24/7 news feed that was going to be giving them all of the bad news stories, and that would feed them more bad news stories when they clicked on one of them.
Right. Right.
You know, it's like we are now in this environment that is taking advantage of all of these innate survival cues, and it's making us overly anxious and stressed out, and lonely, hungry for connection. You know, there's just a wide variety of ailments, is what I would call them, I guess, emotional ailments that we are collectively suffering from. And that's prior to the pandemic.
Yeah,
So,
but the one thing I would say, the only thing I feel like I've learned is that when I'm so glad you said collectively, because I feel like before this, like when I lost my job after 14 years at Sirius XM in October, I thought I was completely alone. I was the only person who had lost his job ever. I just felt so isolated because everybody else I knew was doing pretty well, and certainly they had their jobs and they hadn't experienced what I was experiencing. I was kind of feeling like a victim in a way. And it changed drastically with the pandemic, where everybody was losing their job, or at least everybody was dealing with the type of anxiety now that I was. And that created, I must admit, a sense of comfort that I am not alone, which is actually how I end the show every day. You're not alone, because what does that collective anxiety do for us? How should we handle that collective anxiety? I don't know what the question I'm trying to ask, Eve, but I just love that you said it's collective, because it really feels important to mention.
Yeah, no. Okay. So you're getting my mind thinking down a path that I hadn't actually gone to before, which is I'm
let's go.
I'm thinking about, is this pandemic, contrary to what a lot of people are saying, is it going to make us feel closer to one another? Because what a lot of folks are saying is this is going to be exacerbating loneliness. People do feel more isolated. And there are some initial studies that are showing that. On the flip side, so when I do presentations now virtually, I like asking questions to kind of poll the audience.
Right. And
one of the questions that I've been asking is about social media and whether people feel that social media has become a friendlier place since the pandemic. And I've done a few of these asking that specific question so far, and every audience has said yes, that they feel like social media is a friendlier place right now. And, oftentimes people now will chat on whatever your video conferencing site is, and they'll kind of get into these conversations. And what I'm seeing a lot of people talk about is the fact that because there is a collective grieving that's happening right now, a collective suffering, we are using these platforms to give each other advice or lift each other up. It's very practical information. Whereas prior to this, all the data, and I go deep into this in the book, all the data shows that social media really ultimately was making us feel jealous, making us question our own value. It was making us feel envious, depressed. It was making you feel more isolated. So what you're talking about now is I'm like, oh man, it's like social media has become what it was, I think, supposed to be all along during this crisis.
What it was at the beginning, maybe, which was kind of fun and funny. Yeah.
But it was supposed to make people feel connected. And maybe it's finally doing that.
That's very interesting that those are the answers that you're getting. And given the divisiveness of politics in this country today, I think that it's somewhat surprising. But when you add the layer of the pandemic, where the entire world is having a similar experience, as a comedian and as even a host of a media outlet, the idea of trying to talk about things that people can relate to is super important. And now everybody can relate to this. There's not a person in the country that can't relate to having to wear a mask or how you feel about that, social distancing, all of it. And it creates this shared experience. But it also creates, to move along the conversation here and get back to loneliness, I talked to a woman today that says, Pete, I may not talk to another adult all day long. And that is very hard. And there are a lot
Yeah.
of single people. There are single parents.
Yeah.
And even if you work from home, you might not interact with another adult. And I couldn't relate to that because, of course, I live with my wife and I talk to people, interview people all day, every day. But that's a really important and challenging outcome, to not have any interactions with other adults all day, maybe even all week. What does that do to us, Eve?
Well, that actually can have physiological ramifications on our health. So being isolated like that is a real problem. And I don't mean to suggest that social media is going to be the fix for that. I think that
and it's not a problem for all people, just to interrupt
right.
you, because maybe some guy wants to live out in the woods and not talk to anybody, and that makes him happy, I would imagine. But most people probably.
But most people, again, like going back to like what environment did we evolve for? We evolved to live with other people, to have a group of people that we felt a sense of kinship with.
Yep.
Yeah, we're tribal. We're very tribal. Now, our tribes are actually supposed to be pretty small. They're not supposed to be 5,000 people on the internet. It's supposed to be like 25 super immediate friends. The cap actually on the number of people who you can really genuinely know is 150. So, social media does provide this kind of like false idea of the relationships that we can build. But no, I mean, I have a friend who has been alone this whole time, and she ended up moving to another friend's house because she was like, I just couldn't stand it.
Wow.
And that makes sense to me.
Sadly, that friend regrets it, but
I was gonna say,
it was going good for the first month, Barb, but man, you still have your place, right?
But yeah, no, I mean, I recently read an article that was about coworkers who all live alone, who 2 months into the pandemic said, screw this, we're going to go rent a house together.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to put up with each other's like weirdo habits that we don't even
that's interesting. I want to read that
about, because we have to spend time with other people. And I think, kind of just to return, just close the circle a little bit on the role of social media. Generally speaking, right, people go online and post pictures to brag, but there's not much to brag about right now. And so I do think that it's, for a lot of people, making them feel less alone because other people are experiencing the same hardships. They're struggling with the same things, even if it's as simple as like, how do I stretch out my meals so I don't need to go back to the grocery store so often? Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to look at. Yeah. But although, speak for yourself, I mean, I took pictures of my home gym and tweeted it out and felt very good about bragging that I built a gym with like buckets and chains.
Oh, that's cool. But see, someone else could replicate that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think I probably stole it from somebody else. I rarely have an original idea. Well, let's talk about, I'm fascinated, of course, by food systems and the chain of custody of an apple, where it starts and where it ends. And and you have a really, you have some really good research, and your writing is excellent, by the way. Really, really good. I was a little too impressed. I was like, wow, I don't even think I've ever heard that word. Lugubrious. I forget what it was. But anyway. Lugubrious. It was very good. Very impressed. But the food system issue is a really interesting one. But you have a part in your book where you kind of quiz people and ask them what they know about kind of where their food has been, where it came from, how it was grown. And as a parent, I realized that that's a super important thing to do, to teach to your kids, because my kids think, maybe less so my kids because I have such an extensive garden, but most American kids especially think that food is grown in the grocery store. It comes from the grocery store. Yes. What's broken and how do we fix it?
Oh my gosh, the what's broken.
Yeah, I'll just sit back and you can talk for the next 20 minutes.
So is the how do we fix it? But again, kind of going back to the world that we evolved for, we evolved to know where our food came from. And that is an aspect of control, right? Because you want to know where your food came from. You want to know what it is because you want to make sure that it's safe to eat. But it turns out that knowing more about our food also makes the eating experience more pleasurable. It actually makes food taste better when you know the origins or you know who cooked your food. And so when it comes to kind of repairing our relationship with food, I actually do think that the pandemic is helping in some ways.
Oh, I cannot argue. I cannot argue with that. I totally agree. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, just interest in CSAs, so community supported agriculture, went through the roof within the first month. People finally being like, oh, wait, there are farmers near where I live who grow things in my region. I also think that for a lot of people, it was the first time with so many meat plant workers getting sick and harvesters getting sick. I think for a lot of people, it was the first time that they were like seeing what a meat factory looks like on the news and being like, oh, wow, like that's how my chicken gets to me. Or even thinking about the fact that if you buy a package of chicken thighs in the grocery store, that means that there was someone or multiple people who literally cut up those chickens and put just the thighs in a package so that you didn't have to break down the chicken at home. It's like these things that so many of us take for granted. Oh. I think there's been a light shown on them over the last few months. And maybe that is step one. I do think that right now is, dare I say it, it can be an exciting time for building back a better food culture where we are more connected to the foods that we're eating. We have a greater appreciation for the energy and expertise and cost that goes in all along the way to our food system. I would say that the most important thing to do with kids is get them in the garden. And it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Well, I'm trying. My daughters are 12 and 15 and they rarely will actually go in the garden, but I try not to force them to do too much. What I do try to do is role model behavior. So I planted a raspberry bush 5 years ago between their windows. So when they open the window, they see those raspberries. They see the garden when they open the windows. They might not go into it, but they cannot deny where and how the food comes from, including that I grow this, I start growing from seed under lights in February and they see all that and hopefully, but by the way, that was my childhood too. I took it all for granted, but I did watch my grandfather, never imagining that I would put a seed in the ground myself and didn't until I was in my 30s when I moved to the suburbs, really. So, but I also think that so much is laid bare about our food system. You pointed to a couple of examples there, but also the people that are working in the food system and understanding how essential they are and how hardworking they are. But I called the local nursery to get some soil because a friend of mine wanted some soil for his cannabis plants. They weren't mine, Eve. But the point is, my friend, Shmeet Mamanek, he told me that they were out of soil. And the nursery, the woman at the local nursery said that it's because so many kind of people that have never grown food are coming in and buying it. They can't keep the supply in. And I'm not, it's just one place and one anecdote, but I have been hearing that there's been a tremendous demand for people growing their own food for any number of reasons that we've already identified and probably many that we haven't. But what else does it lay bare about our food system and what's broken? There's so much in your book and there's so much to talk about with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one of the core things that you were just touching on there is like, who do we value as essential?
Yeah.
It's like, well, the people who actually grow our food and distribute our food and put our food on shelves or cook it up for us, they are so undervalued in our society, along with teachers. My husband's an elementary school teacher, so that's another one I'm thinking about a lot.
Wow.
But these people who keep us fed and nourished and knowledgeable are the ones that we don't pay, who we don't give health care to, who we are not protecting with a stable work environment.
They're invisible, though. Partly we're assholes, but partly they're invisible.
Well, but it's also, this is the industrialized food system.
Yes.
Right? And so one of the things that I've been spending a ton of my time on lately is a nonprofit that I founded last year, and it's called the Food for Climate League. And our whole goal is to shift the narrative around climate smart eating. So right now that conversation is framed mostly in the negative. People say eat less meat, create less waste. But really what we need to be doing in order to combat the climate crisis through the foods that we eat is just eat more interesting food. And what eating more interesting food means is take advantage of what's being grown around you, what can only grow in your region. Learn about the people who are growing the food in your region, who are cooking it up. Learn about the cultural heritage that you might have come from. It all gets back to how do we return to a way of eating that is both better for our physical health, but also our mental well-being, which is at the same time going to be addressing the climate crisis. But by doing that, we're also reconnecting ourselves with where our food comes from and kind of undoing a lot of these industrial systems that have come to define our food habits.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's really important. Foodforclimateleague.org. I was going to ask you about that nonprofit. I guess I didn't realize that you founded it, but it's excellent and really impressive. But I feel like it's just making a dent or a scratch on the industrialized factory farm capitalist food system in this country. And we have a long way to go. But I also love that you just mentioned, you know, basically growing food native to where you live. And specifically when you think about climate, I always think about, I feel like almonds. I feel like it's almonds that require way too much water, and people love them. And almond milk is in now, but we can't be continuing to grow certain crops that require certain resources that we don't have enough of. Am I being controversial, or is that a truth? I want to eat whatever I can grow, but if I'm taking too much water from my whole farm to grow my almonds or whatever it is, then I don't have something that might be easier to grow and be able to feed more people and healthier as a result of those resources. But capitalism is more likely deciding, or crony capitalism really, in terms of who gets the money and funding. What have I said that makes sense, or is it all bullshit? Because I kind of hope it is all bullshit.
It's not all bullshit, but I'm not going to say that we shouldn't be drinking almond milk, because it is environmentally better in many cases than some other alternatives. The real problem with our food system is that if you're drinking almond milk in California, say, your buddies also want to drink it in New York and in Hong Kong and in, New Zealand. And then everybody wants to have almond milk. And then all the farmland gets turned over to grow one thing.
That's what I was trying to explain, but you did it in like 6 seconds. You could say the same about fish, right?
Yeah, you could say it about anything. It's like, why do we only eat salmon and halibut and tilapia?
Ooh, tilapia is garbage, I learned. Well, I learned tilapia is like a garbage fish, and I used to like it. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't eat it.
But it's this really interesting thing where we just gravitate towards these certain foods because we're more familiar with them because companies are selling them to us, and we've forgotten to just look at what's growing around us. Right. What's in our immediate environment. What can we eat that is here, like where you are, from sources who you can actually get to know, instead of waiting for a food company to bring it to you. Now, I am not anti-big food, mind you. I think that it's big food's responsibility to save the earth. For us, I should say. Earth will be fine without us on it.
Good point.
I do think that big food does have a responsibility to be supporting farmers as they change their farming methods, as they grow a greater diversity of crops, as they do things like crop rotations. I can really nerd out on the farming, the ag side of this. At the end of the day, it means we need to be eating more interesting food. And you shouldn't be able to eat the same thing in New York that you're eating in California. Period. We should be proud of the food that is in those specific regions, like it still exists in much of the rest of the world. And we should figure out what we're really darn good at wherever you are. Well, what is your soil set up for? You know?
What's your climate set up for? And that's changing, right. Unfortunately. You're able to grow certain tropical fruits now in northern climates than they were before, is my understanding at least. But by what you just said, if those were the rules, then Nevada or Las Vegas should not be a city where humans live. And that's what I believe, by the way. I believe that.
Yeah,
I don't believe that city should have ever been founded, and that human beings shouldn't live in a place where there aren't natural resources. But I'm not God, so. And I don't like gambling.
And I don't want to offend everybody who lives there, but
I do. I already have. I've said this so many times, and I've lost Florida as well, by the way. Their fault.
Listen, I do think that there's going to have to be a mix of systems where, in part, we are going back to essentially the old ways, right? The old ways and the methods that we evolved for. But there's also some really great new technologies that can be intermixed with all of this that will make it so that we can have this crazy number of people living on this planet,
Rooftop.
Right? Because also, right. Rooftop is just one example of many. There's lots of promising things in hydroponics and aquaponics. Again, you have to deal with the energy use and all of that other stuff. But
everything has a cost. I think people forget that. As you said, the Earth, the planet will be fine without us. But everything
Yes.
has a cost. I have solar panels and an EV vehicle, but they still have a carbon footprint. And people don't
Yes.
realize that when they get in a discussion or argument. I'm not saying anything's perfect. We as humans consume.
Yeah.
So everything costs something. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. Sorry. You're just getting me thinking about like one of my big takeaways for myself in doing the research for this book was in realizing that doing the things that are good for the planet or even good for our pocketbooks are also good for us physically and mentally. The things that will keep us healthy, keep us happy, are also the things that Mother Earth wants us to be doing. And just like, I'll give you a very, I guess the most basic example is the get to know where your food comes from, right? You're going to trust your food. It's going to taste better. You'll build a relationship with whomever that is. Your meal will be so much more satisfying if you know the story behind it instead of mindlessly eating, which I think is what most of us do. But the other side of this is like, I think about food waste, right? You're going to also waste less food if you know more about it, which is also going to be better for your pocketbook. Like we waste so much money and time on things that don't make us happy. And it's time for us to start taking our own well-being seriously. And in doing so, we will be doing what's good for planet Earth.
Don't you think, though, that maybe we waste that time and money on things that don't make us happy with making the mistake that they do make us happy?
Oh, yes. 110%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's just any number of things that you can do or eat. I mean, frankly, I get pretty extreme about work. Like we think that the more we work, the more money we'll have. The more money we'll have, the happier we'll be. When in fact, we should be measuring happiness by, in my equation, is time, love, people. How much time do you have? Time, love, health. How much time do you have in your life where you and your people are healthy? And were we able to take advantage of that? No, most people were out working, trying to make money, and then never really living. And I feel like that's the main mistake that we make, and we can talk about the catalyst for that. But boy, do we do a lot of bullshit thinking that it's going to make us happy when in fact it does the opposite, which is what it sounds like you're saying.
Yes, and I do think that was my big takeaway from the book. And my husband and I have, I would say it's a joke, but it's not entirely a joke, about the fact that we really want to, at some point, just give everything up and become flower farmers. And that idea came from the research in the book, which was just like, why am I burning myself out doing these things that at the end of the day aren't going to make me happy? And I do hope that whoever picks up Hungry, whoever, takes the time to flip through it and read through all this research can see the applicability in their day-to-day lives. And there's certain things that we can each be doing that they're not expensive. They're not too timely. It could mean just, growing something on your windowsill or taking the time to cook a meal, or I was going to say meet up with a friend for coffee, but that's kind of less an option right now.
You can still do it virtually.
But still, you can do it virtually, or like do a socially distanced meetup with somebody in person. I guarantee you it will make you feel better. But it's all about finding a sense of contentment and meaning. And I think that there's a lot of things in our society that are pushing us in the wrong direction. And for me, I always come back to the heart button.
Yeah.
We live in this world right now where we're told that we have to be, quote, liked. Even getting a book deal was about likes.
I have
people
these
say,
people,
well, what's your platform?
Right. Well, yeah, because it's all about money and popularity and all that. I have this woman who I follow on Instagram. Her name is Julia Mancuso, and I only know her because she's an Olympic skier, and I'm a big skier, and she's beautiful. I will admit that doesn't hurt. So I follow her. Then I started following her sister, who's like a personal trainer, and I started looking at their life. They live in like Hawaii. It looks like, Eve, they live in Hawaii and just surf and hang out on the beach, and their lives are amazing. And what happens is I look at them and I feel envy. And partially I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody in their family and their friend group is gorgeous. Their husbands are gorgeous. They're gorgeous. Everybody's beautiful. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's happy. They have no problems. That is such a poison moment, feeling, and such a disingenuous one. And I realize that, but I still fall for it on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah. I mean, I in doing the research for this book, I logged offline for the most part.
Have you stayed off?
Well, I can't now. I mean, how am I going to be promoting my book?
Yeah. Yeah, but one thing's different. Like sharing things is different than, I think, to some extent, looking at things and allowing them to make you feel the way that they do.
Yeah. Well, so it is interesting, though. So when I did go back online, so like my Instagram is really the only platform that I like. Twitter makes me enraged. So I can't really spend much time on there. I personally don't find much positivity on there. Instagram, though, I have curated it so that I am only looking at body positivity models and gardening and my friends and the people who I like genuinely care about.
Right. People
who I feel envious of, I stopped following them.
That's good. That's healthy.
But it takes a lot of self-control.
Yes.
To not, to do that, to hit unfollow. It takes
mindfulness first to identify that it's happening. Then control to try to prevent it from continuing to happen. But like, you don't even I think we probably mostly don't realize that certain tweets and posts are making us feel a certain way. We probably just feel that way and then move on. Why am I feeling bad?
Wait, but I mean, it is interesting. I'm sure that this exists out there, but like doing like, the digital detox. But I bet if you, for a lot of people, if you logged offline for like, I don't know how long it would take for kind of like the withdrawal to go away. Maybe a month. I mean, I think it would take a long time.
I'm so narcissistic that when I get off social media for like a week, I think the world has stopped. Keep going. I was gone. Did anything happen?
Yeah.
Sick, so horrible. Let me ask you before I got to let you go, because I've already taken up more of your time than I asked for, but I'm just so enjoying talking to you. Chapter 6 of your new book, and every chapter in the whole book is so fascinating, so important. I think everybody should go buy Hungry. Is titled Diets and Identity. And I don't think that I've ever really read anything like this chapter of this book. Explain how you started on this, down this vein.
Yeah. Well, so for that chapter, I go to a vegan speed dating event in New York City, which was super fun. But this is actually an area of food culture that I've been kind of fascinated by for a really long time. At some point I looked up and was like, why is everyone identifying themselves by what they don't eat? It's like, like 10 years ago, no one was like, hey, I'm Suzanne, I'm a Weight Watcher. Or like, hey, I'm Dave, I'm an Atkins dieter. But now you see on people's profiles or, on their, during, your speed dating event, it's like, hey, I'm Jess, I'm a vegan and I'm from Ohio or whatever. Or I'm Joe and I'm a paleo rock climber.
That's hilarious. I love that guy.
And there's this, like, it shows up in the New Yorker, people are like, how do you know if someone's a vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you.
Yes.
It's, but, I was looking at like, well, okay, again, why? I'm obsessed with the why. Why are people doing this? And a lot of it does have to do with your value systems and finding community. So a lot of the communitarian aspects of our society have fallen by the wayside, especially over the last, I'd say 50 years. People are far less likely to know their neighbors. They're less likely to be going to their religious institutions. They're moving away from family a lot of the time to go seek jobs or educational opportunities. And people are trying to figure out where they belong and how they fit in. And these days, a lot of us are using food as a conduit to finding community. And so in that chapter, I do kind of a deep dive into the various sects of the paleo religion, as I would have come to think of it.
Yeah.
And also, the vegan, vegetarian offshoots and also like the in-group, out-group animosities that develop.
You're right. The intra-community conflicts between types of paleo dieters and vegans, et cetera. It's like Catholics and Protestants, you asked them? Exactly.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Great comment by you. Yeah. That's perfect.
I was just trying
metaphor.
to get an understanding. It's like, what does this infighting really look like? Because at the end of the day, a lot of these people have like the same base value system, but like they differ on like very slight variations of it. And it causes a lot of conflict and like real hard, like real angst. Especially, and this is like something else we didn't even get into, but like, especially when the influencer they follow deviates from that value system.
What happens then? They're burnt down.
Well, I mean, I think it feels like a personal attack on your values. It would be like if your priest said something that you didn't agree with, and you have to look at yourself and ask what your own beliefs are. Food, food is so multifaceted. It is why I continue to study it. But it's religion, it's politics, it is a way we find meaning and the way we show love and the way we can find control. I'm still obsessed with this topic even after doing all that research because I'm still learning. Things in this conversation are new for me that I'm going to be thinking about for a while. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, could you also actually add to food, drink, and even drugs? Oh,
yes, absolutely.
I mean, craft beers and especially, I mean, you mentioned that, of course, in the book as well, but it seems like communities are created around, drinking and drugs as well. And if you stop drinking or stop doing drugs, by the way, more power to you, but we can't hang out with you anymore. Like that happens. It happens.
Yeah, it does happen. There actually
or the
is
other way,
a
I can't hang out with you anymore. It was unhealthy. Yeah.
Yeah. There actually, like, to that point, there is a really interesting community developing right now that is the non-alcohol community. These aren't folks who are going to AA. These are people who are choosing not to drink for a wide variety of other reasons. But that is a diet tribe that I have seen emerging over the last really 2 years. Again, you're gonna find people who think like you do, who have those value systems. It is one of the nice things about the internet. I think that my hope is that people will just start to find even more people around them in their communities and reconnect themselves back to the natural world and focus on the relationships that really matter, that provide value, that don't make us feel envious, but make us feel loved.
2 years ago, I did really well with my tomatoes, had way too many, didn't know yet how to can them and save them. And I brought them over to a neighbor who I'd never talked to, but I knew was Italian and made an assumption. They were so shocked that I was knocking on the door, bringing them tomatoes. They invited me in. I didn't even think they liked me. It was a very weird moment that they appreciated so much. And it was only because I had too much. Mm-hmm. And I'll not forget that. We still don't really talk much. There's no problem. But, it was just a way to connect. And that's something that I read about gardening. And I don't know that I'll be able to do that this year because we're having some problems here with the heat. Maybe I don't think I'm going to have too much of anything. But the point is, it stands. But final question. Where are you on chickens in my yard? I haven't done it. I don't want to do it. It looks like way too much trouble.
I have
a lot of listeners will be pissed at me. I have a lot of listeners with chickens.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I think that it's great if you are a egg eater to be raising your own chickens and again know where they come from and educate your kids. You'll know what you're feeding the chickens. You'll know that they're hopefully happy chickens who are being petted. Do I think that we should be living in close contact with animals? I mean, I think that there's a big debate around that right now.
For sure. Yeah. And is that they carry viruses? Yeah.
I don't really know how to answer that because I also in doing research for the book, one of the most therapeutic moments that I had was with farm animals. I myself was at a point in my life where I was feeling very down for just personal reasons and was out traveling by myself doing research, and I found my time holding a chicken or petting a goat or rubbing a pig's belly to be some of the most therapeutic moments.
Yeah, same. When I ride horses, I don't do it much. I don't know what I'm doing, but when I get on a horse, everything seems right.
Yes.
Maybe not to the horse.
Yeah.
but I'm not a big man. I don't think they care.
I mean, yeah, it's like, it depends on what the relationship is exactly. But yeah, no, I mean, I did read an article that was like, okay, all the baby chicks are selling out. This is along with soil,
I heard that too.
right?
I heard that too. But I mean, you can support your local chicken farmer too, without having to have them in your and know the same things that you just mentioned. You could go, you could pet the chickens if you want, I suppose, but most importantly, you could get the eggs and know what they're being fed.
Exactly. Yes, there are other ways around it besides raising your own. You also run into the problem, which is like several years ago, there was like a big booming interest in raising chickens. And then people quickly lost that interest once they realized that it took work. And there were like chickens roaming around Brooklyn.
Oh, that's funny. Do you really?
People had just like given up on. So if you're going to do it, like be dedicated. Those are beings that you're taking care of. Those are your new roommates.
Can we
be
agree?
Responsible.
Your new roommates. Can we agree though, as the final point? And maybe we can. Maybe you're going to be resentful at this remark. Roosters are assholes. Yes or no, Eve?
I mean, they serve a purpose. I'm going to appreciate them for the value that they bring as reliable alarm systems.
I think they're sexually assaulting violent beings, and they scare the hell out of me.
I was going to say, you clearly have had some bad experience with roosters that I
was attacked. I was attacked as a young boy. A rooster killed my father, but I probably should have told you that to begin with. No, that was a little too Jack Handy deep thoughts. Didn't happen. My dog's barking, which means it's time to wrap it up. I so appreciate this conversation, and I so appreciate this book. Everybody should go get it. Eve, I hope this is not our final conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Me as well. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Oh, she was so great. So nice, so thoughtful, and obviously highly intelligent. Check that book out. Go buy it. Really, you'll like it. Hungry, Avocado Toast, Instagram influencers. I can't talk. I had COVID in my mouth. Sorry. My throat hurts. I feel like I might have COVID. I'm scared. I'm really not. I'm being irrational, but weird. I'll let you know over the weekend. The book is Hungry, Avocado Toast, Instagram influencers, and our search for connection and meaning. Follow her on Twitter. Tell her you heard her on the show. This is the first time she's been on, so it always makes a difference with first-time guests. Go get the book. And now I'm going to get to my Friday regular. Very excited to have him joining me because we always have a great conversation about anything or nothing, about men, about politics, about our lives, about culture. He's a hilarious comedian, and I'll call him a cultural commentator, which I think he's great. I think he has people love his metaphors. He rolls out 4 metaphors, I think, and they're always great. I love talking to Christian Finnegan. He's on Twitter at Christ Finnegan. On Monday, I spoke with his wife, Cambry Cruz, about the loss of her father while he was still in prison and after he'd been paroled. That's a great episode and conversation from earlier this week. Was it Monday or Tuesday? Anyway, look it up in the logs. And here it is right now, the Friday conversation with Christian Finnegan. Join me now, the great Christian Finnegan, always happy when he joins me, which is almost every Friday. And what a week it's been for both of us. We just pressed record, but a lot going on, especially for you. Especially for you. I mean, I'm sitting here talking about my little things that I'm all my responsibilities. But of course, your father-in-law died. I interviewed your wife for the Monday show. People loved it. It was great. How are you guys doing here at the end of the week?
Oh, good. I mean, it's honestly, to be perfectly frank, from my perspective, it's more of a logistical situation. You know, we're running this Zoom memorial on Saturday, which it sounds simple, but it's not, because we have to have a sign language interpreter and a live closed captioner. And so it's a lot of just sort of silly bells and whistles that I'm too stupid to do. And yet I'm the one who's going to be doing it. So I'm sure it'll be a whole nightmare, and I'll ruin the whole thing for all of Camber's family.
Looking forward to that. I wish I could join. Now I wish I could join just for that, to see you bomb at your wife's father's Zoom funeral. What a weird thing. Zoom funerals.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even, he wasn't religious. So it's, in a way, I kind of wish he was in this circumstance, because then at least there's sort of a very simple template. You know, there's a mass, that you say, whereas we're kind of just kind of winging this. We have a few friends of his that have sent videos in, and his grandchildren will be performing Blackbird by the Beatles in sign language.
Cool. Oh, sign language. All right.
Yeah. But nice. It'll be nice to the extent that any of these things can be nice. I mean, nothing is nice right now. Everything is, every emotion is experienced through a pinhole at this point.
What do you mean by that? Say it differently. You mean in general for everybody?
That it's like, I think so. That it's like we can identify things like happiness and excitement and joy, but it feels like we're experiencing them secondhand or thirdhand. That it's almost like when you would eat a piece of frozen pizza from like your junior high school cafeteria, you could identify it as pizza, but it didn't really taste like pizza. Do you know? Does that make sense?
Oh, I love your metaphors. I don't know how you come up with them. Like they're always new. Usually people, a lot, especially people who I talk to regularly, on the show, use the same ones over and over. And I'm like, oh, come on, get a new one. I mean, I shouldn't say anything because I'm not smart enough to come up with them. But boy, yours are always original. We love when you employ them. And so now, yes, I do know what you mean.
Yeah, it's just it's like it will be nice, quote unquote, but will it be nice? Probably not. But it'll be quote unquote nice.
Right. Do you think that I know this sounds so kind of unoriginal, but do you appreciate like littler things a lot more or like try to stay in the moment a lot more? I find myself
I have never been particularly good at staying in the moment. And if I'm better at it now, it's simply because the moment is all there is, really.
Yeah, that's what I mean by it. You're pinched into it. No matter whether you believed in trying to stay in the moment, if that mattered to you, if that was something you practiced or not, and I'm not judging if people do, but now you're kind of forced into it, pinched into it because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, it would seem.
Yeah. And everything that kind of happened in the past seems sort of negligible in terms of importance now, at least in terms of career things and whatnot. All of that sort of stuff that I had been focusing on for the past year, at the very least, has been put on hold. And the future is just sort of a pea soup. And so, yeah, I guess in a way, it is a little bit grounding in the sense that, now is all we have, which I think is the name of a song.
Doesn't it? I feel like with the election and COVID, it definitely, and I try so hard to be positive and optimistic, especially having, kids. I think it makes you, you can reject this not having kids, but maybe it makes you more kind of unrealistic with reality, because you can't imagine the idea of your kids struggling, much less suffering. So you really want to believe in the best and you really want to be optimistic. But with COVID and the election, what I think basically about, and I'll let you take it from here, is like, oh, the worst is definitely yet to come. I mean, if Trump loses, I mean, what's going to happen on election day with the polls? What's going to happen if he loses? What's he going to do in the months following? And everybody's talking about martial law, and not to mention what the hell is going to happen with the virus.
Yeah, dude, I miss the future, if that makes sense. Like, I miss kind of this perception of the future as an oasis from the present. Do you know what I mean? Like, hey, things might be tough now, but in the future, X will happen or Y will happen. And now, this is going to sound a little bit like a bit, because it probably will be once I do stand up again on a regular basis. I think of those car commercials, where it's like the future is now. Like, that's terrifying. Please, no, give me another. I'm not ready for the future yet. Like, let's hold off on the future for the time being. I miss that future that we used to think about, like when you watch like 80s or 90s sci-fi movies. Like, I'm nostalgic for that future where everyone's wearing long flowing robes and people speak in a vaguely British accent and people have sex with their minds and stuff.
Were you tweeting this week about dystopian movies? There was an article going around about maybe dystopian movies aren't good for us.
I was not, but I mean, that resonates with me for sure.
Why? I didn't read it, but
well, I don't know. I mean, I think that generally speaking, when times are good, dystopian movies are more appealing. But when times are tough, you kind of want a little bit of escapism and a retreat into some sort of, like, I think when things are good, it's safe to explore the future being a dark place. But when it feels like the future may actually be a dark place, no thank you. You know, it's like sticking your nose in a carton of sour milk.
That's another one, and it's perfect. Yeah. I think you articulate things so great. People love when you're on because of that. And this conversation is always a unique one for the week, and I so appreciate you having it with me. How did you feel about President Trump's talk about his cognitive abilities? Yesterday, there was that clip of him talking to one of his sycophants in the media, some doctors on Fox News that thinks Trump is great. And he went through the whole cognitive test, the car, the woman thing, and there's been jokes about it all morning, all day. It's been great, but seriously, that was pretty crazy.
I mean, yeah, you half expected him to start bragging that they'd given him a lollipop afterwards.
A sticker. Pick a sticker on the way out, Mr. President.
I got a gold star. They don't give out gold stars. I said, I can't believe this. Nobody's ever got a gold star before.
They told me nobody's gotten a lollipop in like 2 weeks on this test, and I was the first lollipop getter.
I don't
get her.
I don't know. I'm not the first person to acknowledge this, but when he talks about this acuity test, he acts like it's like a test that he aced. You know, that it was like that he got the best grade. It's a pass-fail situation. You either show signs of dementia or you don't. Like, there's no doing great on it. You either pass it or you don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no, it's not an IQ test.
It's kind of like a driving test.
Yeah, my dad took it. I mean, my dad, you know, everybody, once you get to a certain age, will take these tests. It's not uncommon.
Did your dad brag about his results?
No, because I don't think he did terribly well. But
the weird thing. Let me ask you if you are as interested in democracy and crisis porn literature as I am. I've been interviewing all kinds of experts on, mostly historians, on like authoritarianism and fascism, and reading a lot about it, and now arguing about it and coming out, you know, a little bit more on social media and the show, and kind of calling Trump a fascist because it seems to be really applicable. According to all these historians. Have you been following, you know, those authors, those writers and experts, and how much do you think about that democracy?
Yeah, I mean, quite a bit. I mean, I read On Tyranny, which is that very short, which is fantastic, and you know, was written, I think, when Trump was still president-elect, so it wasn't even a, you know, he pretty much called it from the get-go. It's harrowing, and sometimes it just shocks me by how absurdly on the nose it all seems. You know,
I mean, just to be clear, when they define the principles of authoritarianism, of autocracy or fascism, and it's not always perfect in comparing one to another in the present, much less the history isn't always accurate. But when they define those principles, it's right on the nose. It's textbook.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the mistake, and it's something that I don't know if I ever fully articulated a few years ago, but it's something I've always felt, is that I think we have this idea that dictators and authoritarians, you know, spend their adult lives seeking to be dictators. That's been the end goal from the beginning. And I don't think it happens like that. I think that they kind of get trapped into it because they have a limited skill set and they don't know how else to react to challenges to their authority and power. If Trump had a 78% approval rating and everybody loved him, and you know the beautiful boaters were, you know, all over the country. If Trump was as loved as he thinks he should be, there wouldn't be paramilitary in the streets. It's the disconnect between the love that Trump thinks he is owed and the resistance that he's getting. And he doesn't have anything else. He doesn't have a large set of tools to deal with these situations. So all he can do is lean into authoritarianism. And of course, I think that we've all been kind of surprised at how many people in this country were kind of thirsting for that.
I'm going to just step out for 1 second and tell my family to shut the hold on a second. I'm going to keep that on the tape.
Call them dickheads.
Are you serious? I'm talking Christian Finnegan. Doesn't seem to make that much of a difference.
No, I don't see that as being a real trump card, so to speak.
My daughter said, who?
Yeah, I don't blame her. I tell her my wife says the same thing.
Although when I talked to your wife earlier, they were really pumped. So I can't quite explain that.
No, my wife says the same thing about me.
Oh,
anyway. Yeah, no, it's a dumb joke.
We were talking about fascism and democracy in crisis and how, there does seem to be, I can't believe it's happening and unfolding in our lifetimes in America. I guess I'm.
But when you think about who Trump is, I don't know that it was going to play out any other way. I really don't. And the worse things get for him on the coronavirus front,
mm-hmm.
He does, again, I liken him, again, here's another silly metaphor, to use a golf metaphor, which is a sport I don't give two shits about, but other people do. He doesn't have a whole lot of clubs in his bag. He has a giant iron and he has a putter, and that's it. And so it's like,
well, he also has a shotgun, which is not great to golf with, but
yes, and a hair product. But he doesn't really have anything to do to try to help himself on the coronavirus front, because his only two options are do these press conferences or don't do these press conferences. Those are the only tools he has. And that's why he keeps going back and forth. Now he's doing them again because he has no other options. He can't lead. He's incapable of actually leading and being a positive force. And so he's forced to then create this other thing. It's like, oh, well, let's play this other sport where I'm more comfortable. This sport called busting skulls and,
acting like a mafia boss.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, looking back at who Trump is, who we've all kind of known he was, I'm not sure that this wasn't headed this way from the get-go. Even without coronavirus, I do kind of wonder if there would have been something that made him go down this route if he was behind in the polls to the extent that he is.
Do you have anybody in your life now that you talk to on a kind of regular basis that is a supporter or even on the fence in any way?
I have an aunt and uncle who I know voted for Trump,
mm-hmm.
and I know that they're very far to the right, and I don't talk to them much, mostly because of that. And my aunt is suffering dementia, and so I don't really want to take her to task on it. And
if you do, could you tape it for me?
And they're in Massachusetts, so I know that their votes are useless anyway. So, to be perfectly frank, there's no one I have a conversation with on a regular basis who is a Trump defender. I know certain comedians who are, but I wouldn't. First of all, I don't see many comedians nowadays because the virus. And honestly, I have no interest in talking to them. I know that there's this idea that we have to reach out and try to relate to people on the other side, but we're the only ones doing that. And I'm sorry, fuck that. It's like I really genuinely feel like the only thing these people will respect is getting their asses beat. And so I'm kind of more just concentrating on just winning in November, and hopefully that will kind of slap them up a little bit. Because I feel like if you try to suck up to a bully, it's not going to help. It's not going to help.
Mm.
It's just all you can do is either ignore the bully or pop him in the mouth.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. And the reason I ask is because I interviewed a guy this week who I've been corresponding with. He's a listener for, I don't know, a couple of years on and off. And he basically is, I call him a maybe Trumper. And I put it on one of the episodes from this week, and the reaction to it has been just all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I would pay you, I think I'd have to pay you $150 at least to spend the 45 minutes or hour to listen to it. Because I don't think he could do it because of what you just said. But I don't think a lot of people can. I think what you just said is the I don't know where I'm at because I'm a little confused. Like hosting this show at Sirius for all those years, I always had a lot of pressure from my producers and from listeners and from what I thought was my own kind of effort to be as curious and objective as I could to talk with people I disagreed with, certainly Republicans and conservatives. And I didn't even like labels like, what's the issue? Okay, this person disagrees. Let's talk. But Christian, you hear this guy this week. I had such a hard time. I can't find anybody anymore that I can have what seems to be a reasonable conversation with.
No,
and furthermore, just the fun, like how, what kind of a person are you if you look at Trump and you see anything about him, anything that's in any way likable? And I asked this guy, and the final thing I'll say to get your reaction is, I said, is there any redeeming qualities? He said, no, he has no redeeming qualities, but the one point he made is he's not going to take anything from me, and he's giving me something in the form of more money in my taxes. I mean, I'm really shorthanding what Cameron said in over an hour and a half conversation, but that's the end. My point is I'm having a very hard time. People want me to interview people I disagree with and at different points of view, but there is like a chasm now. We barely agree on, what's east, what's west.
I mean, honestly, I would prefer someone who had that answer of, there's no redeeming qualities, but he helps me out, and so screw it. I would prefer that, or I'd prefer to somebody to be like, you know what? I think authoritarianism gets a bad rap. We need to get rid of democracy and scrap it, and we need an iron-fisted ruler. I would have an easier conversation with someone who would just say it out loud rather than couching all of their anecdotal nonsense in, bad faith arguments and false premises and scarecrows. And, there's no middle ground with these people because they have no ground. It's hard to say, oh, you're at A and I'm in Z, let's meet in the middle at, L or whatever, because they don't really tell the truth about what their true intentions are and what they actually want to happen. And I think most people, they look at what's going on now, say in Portland and some of these protests, and they say, you know what, I just don't want that. I want less of that. And I don't like these liberals, Antifa, whatever you want to say. I don't want people spray painting federal buildings and pulling down statues. I just want things to be normal. And I would say to people who might feel that way, okay, tell me in your mind how things get back to normal if Trump is still president. How does it happen? Where's the path to a good night's sleep if Trump gets reelected? Yeah. Because I can very easily tell you how it happens if Biden gets elected.
Joe Biden, you just wrote an ad for him.
Yes.
Joe Biden, a pathway to a good night's sleep. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve of this message.
But if Biden gets elected, he'll totally disappoint people on the left by he probably won't prosecute enough. There'll be some vague talk of prosecuting some of the lawbreakers in this administration, but probably nothing will come of it. And he won't want to defund the police, and he'll try to bring everybody together, and the right will be angry and the left will be angry, but we'll just kind of grumble, and people will go back to their lives. Now, as a person to the left, I think that's a negative outcome. Like, I don't really want things to go back to normal, but I think that there is a massive section of the electorate that just wants things to go back to quote unquote normal. And there is no path to that if Trump is reelected other than out and out like public executions and bloodshed. I don't mean to be hyperbolic about it, but tell me Because you really think that Trump gets elected and all these protesters are going to be like, oh, I guess it didn't work. Back to, I guess we're all Trump fans now. That's not going to happen. So how do you get back to normal without getting rid of Trump? There's no way. It's like you have to get the bullet out before, the wound can heal. Like you can't leave the shrapnel in your body. You have to remove the foreign object.
Yeah, another good one. Very accurate.
That wasn't one of my best.
No, I liked it a lot. I mean, I don't think that. I think it's perfect actually but I also, again, here I am with my optimism. I actually think Joe Biden is going to govern as the most progressive president we've ever had. Although you do make a good point about whether he or not he will prosecute the crimes of Donald Trump and his associates, who are a transnational crime syndicate, as argued by a lot of smart people, including my friend Sarah Kendzior, who's great. I saw a poll this morning that basically it was about America's opinions on race. And one outcome was the positive outcome was like about 80% of Americans, I think, support the Black Lives Matter movement, which is fascinating and surprising. And I'm not sure we would have imagined this progress a long time ago. So I don't know where the blessings are. But there was like 23% who identified with white supremacists or thought white supremacy was OK. Are you surprised by those numbers?
Well, I mean, I'm not anymore. Not anymore. I mean, I'm surprised. I'm constantly surprised that people are able to say that out loud or to embrace that. And I'm sure a lot of these people, they probably tell themselves the lie of, well, everybody's calling me a racist, so I'm going to call myself a racist. But in my head, I know I'm not. I just know these people are crazy. Oh, yeah. I think that there's kind of like a, well, fuck you too aspect when people identify as, white supremacists or whatever, among some people, but they actually are. they think they're just saying that, but they really are that, right? If that makes sense. I mean, no, I guess it doesn't surprise me. And I think that there are a lot of people that are in that Trump bandwagon and they're in for a penny and they're in for a pound. That saying, he who rides the tiger is afraid to dismount. And once you're, they're all in with this guy. And that's I've been reading this guy Jason Stanley's book to anticipate to interview him next week. I can't find the title. I've been preparing for it, but basically he describes that as a tenet of fascism. That what you just said is that they stay with and loyal to the leader till the bitter end. And maybe if their lungs are shredded with COVID, maybe they change their mind at the end. But so many people have said, well, once people lose their job or if the economy really tanked, or if they lost their health care, then they're going to come to their wits and realize this guy is bad for them. But according to history, what you said is exactly what tends to happen with most. And it's even more exacerbated now because of Facebook and social media. You have your political opinions carved into stone for all to see, and the kind of people who are Trump supporters tend to brandish that, and so that you've been putting MAGA on your Facebook wall for the past 4 years. You're not all of a sudden just going to be like, oh, it turns out he was wrong. Sorry.
Right. There's ego, and pride and whatever you want.
I've been doing a bit recently. And again, I hate doing jokes and jokes, but just that now with COVID, like for the first time, I understand what it's like to be a Trump supporter, because I know what it's like to know that I'm wrong in the middle of an argument, but have no choice but to fucking power through it. That there's no backwards for these people. It's like when you're playing hearts and you gotta, you at a certain point you have to shoot the moon. It's like, I'm not going to get rid of all these hearts. Like I've got to just hope that I can thread this needle and hope it pays off.
Oh, you're 3 for 4. Don't play hearts. Don't know what that was. But for those who do play hearts, I bet you it was great.
Playing the game hearts. Well, the whole point of hearts is you have to get rid of, anytime you have hearts in your hand, you're trying to get rid of them. But sometimes you get so many that the only choice is if you can collect all of the hearts, then you get then that's a great thing. So you either have to have all of them or none of them. And at a certain point, if you get a certain number of hearts, it's like, all right, my only choice here is to kind of collect them all, so to speak.
What do you think? Have you followed the horrible drama around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Congressman Ted Yoho, I think, of Texas. Have you heard about this? Anybody hear about this?
Yeah, I hear about this. And Yoho, I used to drink Yoho when I was a kid.
Hey, hear about this? She's a fucking bitch.
Now I'm going to get in my jalopy and... sorry.
That's a Jay Leno impression, everybody. It's everybody's Jay Leno impression. Did you follow that, Sitch?
I mean, I did. I guess it...
You heard? Did you listen to her House floor speech?
No, I have not listened to that yet. I have it saved, but I haven't listened to it. I'm going to
play it. Either I played it already or I'm going to play it after.
I look forward to it.
Because she basically, she just handles the situation with so much grace and kind of wisdom about sexism. And it's really educational, just the way that she talks. And
she's so good. She's so good.
She's your congresswoman. I saw a picture of her at your establishment, your wife's establishment, QED. You know her.
Yes, we did fundraisers for her before she had even won the primary in 2018. She represents Astoria, where we located. So
tell me about her, knowing her kind of personally. What would you say about her character?
Well, I would not say I know her personally. I've been in a room with her a couple times, but she would know me from Adam. She might recognize my wife, but she just unbelievably, she's so incredibly impressive. And I remember right after she won the primary, like a week later was when all of those Keeping Families Together marches were happening, when family separation was the outrage of the month. And I went to one of those marches in Corona in Jackson Heights in Queens, and she spoke at the beginning of it and at the end of it. And at the beginning of it, I was maybe 6 feet from her. I mean, there were only maybe 30 people gathered at the beginning. And then at the end, there were probably a few hundred gathered. But this is when she was on everybody's lips. She had just defeated Crowley, and she could have been, the belle of the ball, going into Manhattan and being, the featured celebrity at that rally, or she could have been on TV and doing all these things. But no, she was there in Queens, marching with people. And I didn't really have any strong opinions about her before that. I was like, oh, she's obviously smart and progressive and cool and all that. But I didn't really think that, this person is somebody who I would follow into battle. And I definitely feel that way now. And I remember the thing that she said, which really resonated with me is like, you're a white person. You probably wonder, like, what can I do? And I'm paraphrasing. I'm butchering what she said. She said it much more eloquently. You're probably wondering, what can you do? What you can do is you can go to your bodega and introduce yourself to the guy who you get coffee from every morning. You can talk to your super. You can know that you can get their phone number. You can make sure that they have your phone number. You can talk to the immigrants in your neighborhood that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, that for whatever reason, it just, you nod at, you wave, you say hello, but you don't know who these people are, but make them know who you are. And make them know that if, ICE comes knocking on their door, that they have someone that they can call who's going to help out, and I just thought that was such a very actionable, concise thing, a very usable piece of advice. And I remember thinking, I'm not prone to thinking, this person could be president one day. And I don't think that she will be president one day because she's probably too good. But I remember thinking, like, man, I would absolutely be a soldier for this person. 100%.
That's really interesting to hear you say. I feel the same way. I would follow her off a cliff. I think she's fantastic.
But on top of that, though, she's just so good at this sort of verbal jousting. Yep. She's able to engage and then get away from it. Like, she's not trapped in sort of bickering. Like, she doesn't get into these sort of like Neera Tanden, David Sirota back and forth bullshit political
she punches
argument.
in, punches out, moves on to the next thing, and is able to seemingly do both that kind of work on social media and actually the work of constituents like you and what's in your interests. And she definitely seems, that's why I hate it when people generalize about people in Congress that they're all bad. I've interviewed a lot of congressmen and I've gotten to know many of them. And someone like her is not, at least not yet. I mean, not even remote. And I don't see her going rotten ever. I mean, I just can't imagine it. Some people are, in fact, uncorruptible. I'll name two: Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul. I despise Ron Paul, but he wasn't corrupted by other people's beliefs or money. I mean, there are many examples like that, and I think AOC is a current one. So
yeah, I mean, the fact that she
and a lot of other
didn't really owe anybody anything. She didn't owe anything to the Queen's machine or anything like that.
Yep.
It has allowed her to speak directly to the concerns of people, not just in her district, but people in her generation. And even though I'm not in her generation, I'm, a solid 15 years older than her, or however much older I am. She speaks to my concerns as a New Yorker, as a person who's like, a relatively savvy urban person. She's one of the first elected officials. There are a lot of elected officials who I bet I would be friends with if I hung out with them personally.
Right.
But she's one of the few elected officials where I felt when she's making her stump speech, I feel like she's somebody who I relate to.
That's well said. All right. Before I let you go, I want to talk about your mental and physical health, but I'll first talk about mine. Yes. I stopped exercising about 3 weeks ago because my back was pretty tweaked pretty badly. I know you hurt your ankle really badly, so we have that in common. But in terms of the pain thing, but I realized I also stopped taking my vitamin C, which I was prescribed after my last physical, my first in a few years, and I stopped kind of thinking about how I was eating. So I haven't been exercising or eating or taking the one supplement that I'm supposed to take, and it's been a few weeks of that. I don't overeat, but what I do eat has not been great. A lot of bread, a lot of cheese, a lot of pasta. And I just kind of realized that this week, and I'm trying to get back on board. I haven't, had any, besides the back, I haven't had any too much damage. It hasn't gotten too far, but I was doing real well there for a while and consistent. But that back tweak will throw you off. And I've also been like up and down emotionally. And I think almost everybody's got to be at this point. Oh, and my wife and I haven't talked in like a week, not because anything's wrong. It's just that we're both really busy and having a hard time connecting. So those are my confessions, and you can respond or not with anything.
I mean, I'm not in a great place, like physically. It's just, I put on some weight, and I've always had food issues and eating issues and stuff. And
people love when you talk about them on the show because everybody has them.
Well, then strap in. No, I mean, I'm at that point, and obviously 2020 is its own beast, right, and it presents its own issues. But I
heard you tried to eat it.
What'd you say?
You said 2020 is its own beast, and I said I heard you tried to eat it.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought you said. Okay,
I'm sorry.
No, I wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly.
The beast sounds like an animal that you could devour.
A roast beast, like in Dr. Seuss.
Yes, that's what I was getting. The 2020 lends itself to all these different emotions that lend themselves to.
But there's also this sort of cycle that I tend to go through in terms of my dietary habits, and it's one of those things where I know that the ride is almost over. Like, it's time to get serious. Like, I know that. And I have been in this place before where I think I may have even said this to you when we were talking about this in the past. The first 2.5 months of quarantine, it kind of felt like airplane rules. Like, an airplane. Yes. Yeah, we've talked about this.
Yeah, but I like it. Go.
Yeah, but you feel like, hey, I'm on an airplane. I can eat whatever I want. Screw it. Like, somehow the calories don't count and the time doesn't count. And that ended a while ago. And so, but for the last month and a half or so, I've been eating just as poorly, only just feeling every bit of it and feeling crappy about it every day. And it's a little hard just because when I'm in the city, it's a little easier for me to control my eating because I don't really cook. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but for me, it's like I go get my lunch. Later that day, I go get my dinner. Perhaps I eat a little bit of a snack, or I have a bag of Skinny popcorn laying around in the apartment or whatever. But it's kind of easier for me to have like eating times. Whereas when I'm up in the woods, like I had been so much for the past few months, we have to go shopping. We have to have the house full of food. And man, it's just really easy to be like, hey, it's been 35 minutes, time to eat something else. That kind of constant food in my face. And, it's like you said, it's like, I'm sure a lot of people are dealing with this right now. And now I think we're in that sort of mode of, all right, well, September will roll around and that'll be sort of back to school, which I still feel the beginning of September always feels like the beginning of the new year, much more than January to me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I agree. Growing up, starting school when I did, although nobody's going back to school this year probably, but yeah.
Right. But that just my biological clock, so to speak, that tends to be when I'm like, all right, get serious,
All right, so I will name one of the worst things I've done, and you can either say pass or quickly, without any inhibitions, tell me what you did. 2 nights ago at 11:30, I ate an entire medium-sized bag of potato chips and had a beer. I jammed it right up in my face, and I felt decent about it, and somehow I slept okay. You?
I hate that that's what you consider like the worst.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I thought it was, what do you got, a cake and a keg?
Not a cake and a keg, but I mean, certainly, multiple beers and then like an entire bag of flavor blasted goldfish crackers.
I've been the whole pandemic crushing sleeves of Ritz, but somehow justifying it because it's not the regulation size. It's like the quarter size sleeve.
Right. Yeah, it's still. But
it's still a Ritz cracker, which is made of I think plastic and fleece.
In grease. It's like oily.
So oily. It's so bad. All right, pal. I appreciate your time as always. Always great to talk to you and catch up here at the end of the week, and a great way to end the week. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, dude. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. There he goes, Christian Finnegan at Christ Finnegan on the Twitter. Give him a follow. Tell him you heard him on the show. And if you haven't subscribed to the show with a paid subscription, now is the time. It is Friday, after all, if you're listening live. Many of you are behind. Come on, catch up with the podcast. So many great guests, so much great information that we're learning together all week. Thanks for another great week of episodes and for your support. Could not do it without you. Right now, we have about 655 or 57, I forget, subscribers. We need to get 3,000 to be able to sustain this so that I can hire someone and do video. I'll be working on the Shed Studio this weekend. Also, Boston Globe columnist Michael Cohen, who joins me pretty regularly, is going to come by. I'm very excited about that. He's bringing his daughters up for a swim. Been excruciatingly hot. Is that the right way to use that word? Excruciatingly? Forgive me. I'm not Captain Vocabulary over here. Associate's degree. Anyway, I'm excited for Michael to come up Saturday. And also, my friend Michael Reese is going to come over today and help me with the electric on the Shed Studio. I'll post some pictures. Getting really excited about it. Getting very excited to move out there, have air conditioning, and have a space that works and functions correctly each and every day. It'll make life a whole lot easier. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you're staying close. I hope you are staying connected. I hope you know you're not alone and that I love you. I appreciate you. And I will talk to you on Monday with my guest, Wajahat Ali, joins me, and much, much more. Looking forward. Tell me who you want on the show. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.